Okay, so I did hit record. You guys should be seeing my screen. Let me, actually, I kind of have everything already ready. I guess the first thing we'll do is go over the case study. So unless you guys have questions. So I guess any questions you guys have, before we start, let me know. I guess specifically from chapter 8. So let's kind of just focus on chapter 8 first, and then we'll go from there. 1 second. Yeah, the drink is right there too. Where? Right there, the red cup. I'll close it. Okay, so let's focus on chapter 8. So I guess if there's any questions you guys have specifically chapter 8, let me know now. Otherwise, we'll go over the case study first, and then we can kind of, move forward from there. But does anyone have any questions right now? Sorry, 1 second. Mace, really? All right. No questions? All right. Okay, so let's take a look at this case study. So there are, oops, doesn't go there. I think that's the first one, yeah? Yeah, okay, slide 5. I also have the answers in a Word document here too that we can kind of check back to as well, okay? So let's just take a look at this first. And then let's talk about what you guys put for your answers here. All right, so for number 1, and again, you're answering these 2 questions based just on that information that they gave you here. We don't want to look ahead. We're answering it based on this. So considering Miss Vincent's age, so age 54, and lack of health screening for 22 years, what could be causing her symptoms? I hope you guys all agree that it could be multiple things, right? So your answer to this probably is a list of different things, and then you would want to kind of say why, right? So again, it's giving you very general information here. So now it's just for you to kind of start thinking about stuff now. So the one thing, what do you have in terms of information here about Miss? Go ahead.
Heart attack.
Why heart attack?
Because so with one of the symptoms, like the blood, you're not getting enough blood and like oxygen in the blood. So there might be like a clot or a blockage, just like, yeah, something like that.
Okay. Okay, what else? What are some other things that you guys put?
I thought accounting. Oh,
Mariana, go ahead.
No,
I thought accounting her age. I thought she was going through like menopause or something like that.
Okay. Okay, perhaps that doesn't cause shortness of breath.
Well, I was looking into like the symptoms, and then one of them were like, oh, because the lungs don't work as well, you might be dizzy and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe, but
Lungs not working as well has nothing to do with menopause.
oh well, I guess whatever source I looked at was probably wrong, most likely.
Well, I mean, again, just think about it. So this is meant for you guys to think about, yeah? Not to go looking to see what other people said. So, and think about all of the symptoms. But you're right, maybe dizziness, and maybe mild fatigue could be a result of that, but shortness of breath, not quite, right? And so again, it's fine. Whatever you list is fine, but like if I gave this to you on an exam, you would need to give reasons as to why you picked that, right? Now you might have picked that based on age. Okay, maybe I'd buy that. But again, the shortness of breath is a little kind of weird with that, but you don't have much information here. So the point is you probably could justify a decent amount of sort of choices or a decent amount of answers here, okay? But again, it should fit with everything that's presented here, okay? What else? What's some other things that you guys put for number 1?
I thought a decrease in glucose.
Okay, what do you mean by decreasing glucose?
Like she's not getting enough like sugar.
So meaning a diet issue that something like that. Okay. All right. What else?
Just because the dizziness and the like less than normal activities, just because she's not having the proper nutrients.
Okay. Okay. All right, potentially. But again, shortness of breath, right, should clue you into something a little bit more. Now, I guess kind of 1 and 2 kind of fit together, because then if you look at number 2, right, it's saying what could be contributing to the symptom of dizziness and mild shortness of breath, right? Particularly kind of focusing in on there. So I feel like you could probably have the same answers for both 1 and 2, the way that they're kind of asked. So just know that as well. So I guess we can kind of consider both of these together. So somebody else tell me what you put for either number 1, number 2 here, in terms of what are you thinking is going on here?
I said respiratory acidosis.
Who's that? Go ahead. I don't know who's.
You got it, Manuela.
I said respiratory acidosis for 2, because then in 1 I said she could probably have acidosis or alkalosis.
Okay, so why would you choose that?
So it said on the whole flow chart slide
Mhm.
that a response to respiratory acidosis could be hypoventilation. So she's like breathing less. And if you're breathing less, that also leads into oxygenation and perfusion.
But that's okay. I can see why you might pick that. But when you're thinking about hypoventilation or hyperventilation, that's an acute thing, right? That's something that you have respiratory acidosis. That's something that's going to happen immediately, sort of in terms of a response of your body to try to, deal with the changes in gases in the blood, right?
Right.
So this is shortness of breath, right? Meaning, and this is, again, you don't have that much information, but this is kind of more long-term, kind of, she's been noticing she's short of breath, for the last, I don't know, whatever, 6 months, but you don't really have that information. So fine. If you, again, that's why I'm kind of saying you can have sort of different answers here as long as you sort of justify. So I think that that's okay. But just when you think about the terms hypoventilation and hyperventilation, they are more acute and kind of short-term responses. It's not like you're not going to be hypoventilating, right, for months or anything like that, if that makes sense. Okay, that's just a little of a terminology kind of thing. Okay, but I think in terms of your the way you're thinking about it and your justification, that's fine. Okay. Go ahead. Who else?
So, you go first.
No, you were before me, so it's fine.
Rachel.
Oh, okay. I just said pneumonia, because a lot of people who have pneumonia, walking pneumonia, they don't know, and they have shortness of breath, and they're still doing everything, their everyday activities, and they're fatigue, and so it starts slowly, and then you start to feel the symptoms more.
Okay. All right. Again, potentially, right? Because, right, pneumonia could cause shortness of breath. Okay. All right. What else? Rachel.
Yeah, so I wrote a couple different things. So at first I wrote hypercalcemia, because I saw in the lectures that it can lead to weakness and lethargy, and she was saying that she's feeling weak. And then I also put pitting edema, and that part kind of speaks more to the shortness of breath and trouble breathing. And then I also put trouble walking, and then I said that could be a sign or a symptom of something more serious, like a heart failure or something like that.
Okay. All right. Okay, good. If you guys look at the answers here, this is, again, these are the book answers, right? But we always discuss these a little bit further. For number 1 and 2, it says here for number 1 that it was only her age, right? So a number of any age-related disorders, hypertension, heart failure, electrolyte imbalance, right? So I think Fabi kind of said glucose, but maybe it could be a dietary thing that's causing those electrolytes to be off, right? So I think we all kind of hit on the sort of main concepts here, right? We all kind of had different answers though. For number 2, again, getting a little more specific, but they're kind of, I don't know, sort of kind of the same answer, right? Hypertension may have caused heart failure, right? And some of these symptoms could be attributed to that, okay? It says also too, you could have an undiagnosed cardiac arrhythmia. Again, you guys had a bunch of different answers here, and that's fine as long as your reasoning makes sense. And I think all of you guys sort of were able to justify why you put that down, okay? That's all I would be looking for, is that we could justify why we would put a sort of a condition there, okay? Are there more questions about numbers 1 and 2, given that limited information? Okay. All right, so let's read the next part and then talk about questions 3 and 4. Now, there's probably some information in here that we don't really quite know what it is, which is fine. And again, I'm not expecting anyone to be memorizing, what the the appropriate oxygen level is or anything like that. If I was going to ask you specifically about some of those sort of lab results, I would give you what the normal readings were. But you can tell by the other information that's given, right? She is in mild to moderate respiratory distress and started on 2 liters per minute of oxygen to supplement her poor oxygen levels, right? So that obviously clues you in that that oxygen level is not appropriate, right? But again, I don't expect you guys to memorize these things, okay? I will give you any information you might need kind of on those levels, on that level, okay? All right, so let's look at this on the next questions, okay? All right. Number 3 says, what's the likely cause of Miss Vincent's pedal edema? So what does pedal edema mean? Did anyone look that up?
It's swelling in
Like
your legs.
swelling of the legs.
Correct. So it's lower extremity edema, right? Which is what she has. So what do you guys put for number 3 here? Somebody who hasn't answered yet.
I said
Go ahead. Who was that? Who's that?
Natasha.
Natasha, go ahead.
I said that she's obese. Because she's obese, it's probably the cause, because she doesn't work out as much and the muscles aren't able to pump out that excess fluid that she has.
So would you really think of obesity as being a direct cause of edema?
No, but I feel like it is a big factor to that. And then because of that, I also mentioned a decreased correlate osmotic pressure, because I assumed since you're obese, you're probably a little bit malnourished in those proteins that I saw on the PowerPoint.
Okay, but again, if we're thinking particularly about edema and given some of the other clues here, right? What do you guys think is most likely at this point causing the lower extremity edema? And by
Early
the way,
heart failure, like signs of heart failure.
perhaps, right? We're saying
Okay.
she's an AFib, right? Her oxygen are low. That indicates there's some sort of probably beginnings of heart failure going on. Now again, Natasha, what you wrote, I don't think that's not wrong, right? I just want us to kind of think about some of these other clues that are in here. And certainly, obviously, obesity would contribute to a heart issue, right? And so you can kind of think of that's sort of almost before what we're, right? So it's sort of the indirect cause, yeah?
I put that her atrial fibrillation could be the cause of it, because that is I looked it up that it causes rapid heart rate, and then the 2 upper chambers of the heart experience like chaotic electrical signals, and then that could cause like swelling and buildup in places.
If you're in AFib, right, it's the atria that are fibrillating, right? So they're not contracting and relaxing the way they should. Therefore, your heart's not going to be able to pump the way it needs to, right? And so that contributes to edema. Well, what starts happening, right, is then that blood or essentially not the blood, but because the blood sort of ends up sort of accumulating kind of in the vessels, right, the pulmonary sort of circulation, that then causes fluid to leak out, right, around the lungs, and then lung function is compromised, and this is how this all contributes to edema. So if you have heart failure, edema is definitely one of the things that you see. Now, a lot of times you'll see pulmonary edema, but also just generalized edema as well. Okay, so what else? What are some other things that you guys put here?
Oh, it also could be like a sodium intake, like levels, like if she has a high sodium intake in her diet, that could also cause that.
Okay, yeah, that's good too, right? Again, if you're gonna, whatever you write down as a possibility, just make sure you say why you wrote that down, right? That's all. What about number 4 here? It says, what factors are most likely contributing to the development of hypertension in Miss Vincent? So what's hypertension? It's another word for hypertension.
High blood pressure.
Yeah, it's high blood pressure, right? So what given what we're kind of talking about here in terms of the edema, right? Sort of increased blood volume, kind of think about that, right? I mean, this can contribute to hypertension, right? Did we write that down? So if you think about what I talked about in chapter 8, whenever there is an increase in volume, blood volume, what does that do? Does it increase blood pressure or decrease blood pressure?
Increase.
Increases it, right? Again, think about a hose, right? A hose that has a little bit of water, there's not a lot of pressure there, right? But if there's an increased volume in that hose, it increases the pressure. So you can think about, the blood vessels that way. So what's most likely contributing to the hypertension? Would you guys write for that? Would you put as the reason for that?
So like with that, I focused on the fact that she's like overweight. She's like, I think 0.9 away from being like morbidly obese. So like I saw in the slide that it said like you can have like central fat distribution. So like in that case, then that will make the blood thick, and then that could lead to hypertension. That's what I wrote.
Okay, potentially. Yes, but again, let's stick kind of with what those symptoms are telling you, right? We're kind of sticking with the sort of heart failure thing, right? That's what's causing the edema. And yes, you can have those, that answer is legitimate as well. The one thing that I wanted to point out, okay, if you guys, we're all talking about obesity, right? What about, what do you notice here in terms of the weight that's sort of described there? Why did they tell you that her weight was 215 2 weeks ago?
To show how much fluid she's put on.
Thank you. Yeah, right. That it has nothing to do with, she didn't like gorge herself the last 2 weeks, right? That rapid weight gain is due to the water retention, right? Is due to the fluid retention. So that edema that she has, that's what's causing her weight to be 235 pounds. And likely even 2 weeks ago when she was 215, probably a lot of that weight has to do with the fluid retention, right? So that kind of, that's why they're telling you that 2 weeks ago it was that, you know what I mean? Sorry. So kind of, that's something to kind of, sort of pay attention to when we're thinking about edema and again, retention of fluid, right? Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. All right. So if we look at number 4, right, the book wrote here, her elevated blood pressure may be related to the excess fluid volume from her untreated heart failure. Maybe, right? Again, I mean, you can kind of just even go back to the fact that, she's 54 years old. It does seem like she's obese. Likely her diet's not great. That can be contributing to her hypertension as well, right? So there are other, answers that you could justify here for sure, okay? All right. So let's, questions about those guys? Let's move on and take a look at what's written here. All right, so let's look at the last little bit of information that's there in those last two questions, guys. All right, so number 5, explain the pathophysiology of the crackles and the dyspnea, right, which is the shortness of breath, experienced by Miss Vincent in relation to heart failure. What'd you guys put for this, for number 5?
So I put when a patient begins to experience congestive heart failure, the heart is not able to act successfully as a pump, which causes fluid to accumulate in the body. Can be either within like the whole body or just the lungs, like that's right or left heart failure. So when the fluid backs up the lungs and air passes through the fluid, that makes that crackle sound. Obviously, it decreases the surface area of the lungs functioning, which also makes you short of breath.
Yes, good. Good. What are some other things you guys put for number 5?
Just sorry, just to add on to what she just said, I just also added that the crackles and the dyspnea, they're like, oh, you can't even see me. The crackles and the dyspnea, they're like related because I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but the dyspnea is like caused by like shorter breath, and then the crackles in your lungs, you know, there's water in it, so of course the oxygen can't get into the alveoli because there's water in there. So
yeah. Okay. All right, good. Yeah, I mean, those are good answers. In terms of number 6, it's asking about the drugs that they then gave her, right? So discuss the rationale for the use of furosemide and warfarin, right, for the management of heart failure, AFib, and hypertension. So why was she given those 2 types of drugs? What are they, I guess, in general?
I put for furosemide. I don't know if I'm saying it right. I put that it was treated to it was to treat the fluid retention in her lungs, and then warfarin was for the blood thinners because her pressure was high, and then due to the hypertension.
And also warfarin is going to also help with the AFib as well, right? Because AFib, you have a tendency to develop clots. So a blood thinner was given because of that. And then let's see what else we got here. Yeah. So I just want to see if I missed anything. Right. So the furosemide is really, it's a diuretic, right? And remember, and I think hopefully you guys listened to the chapter 8. There was a couple times in that lecture where the use of diuretics was mentioned in terms of affecting electrolyte levels. And hopefully you guys kind of picked up on this, but there are many different types of diuretics, right? In terms of their mechanism of action. But what do they all do? When you say something's a diuretic, what in general does it cause?
Help the body get rid of the water.
Yeah, helps the body get rid of the water by doing what?
Urination.
Yeah.
Moving sodium.
Yeah, increasing urinary output, essentially, right? But like I said, it can, depending on which one you're talking about, there's a couple different ways it can do that. But in general, it's going to increase urinary output, right? And cause your body to excrete out as much fluid as it can, right? So again, nobody's, responsible for memorizing these specific drugs or anything like that. But if I told you, hey, this drug is a diuretic, how is it then helping in this case? We should be able to rationalize through that. Okay. Remember, this is all about understanding, right? And I think you guys can see just from doing these case studies, there's a lot of details there, right? There's a lot of different, clinical tests that are done. There's different drugs that are given. There's different symptoms. A lot of the symptoms overlap. Okay. So there's a lot of things to consider. So as long as we're kind of understanding the main concepts, that's all I'm looking for at this point. Okay. Nothing really about pathophysiology is really straightforward, right? It is complicated. Okay. So if that's kind of the way you guys are feeling, that's true. That's just because that's true, right? Medicine and science are complicated. So I just expect you guys to kind of pick up on those main, sort of the main symptoms or main concepts, or at least we're able to justify why we chose something. Okay. So from a case study like this, it's again, rationalizing why you chose what you did, okay? Does anyone have more questions about this case study? No? Okay. Now remember, there's also another case study for chapter 8 that's, it's on Moodle in unit 3 case studies. So you guys can take a look at this case study as well, okay? If you take a look at it and you're not sure what the answers are and you have a question about it, just shoot me an email and I can, we can talk more about it, or I can kind of send you the answers. But remember, I'm not just blindly posting answers to the case studies, because a lot of times I'll use some of these on the exam. So I don't want to just post the case studies. But if you have a question about it, like you went through and did it on your own, but you're not sure about your answers or something like that, just email me, okay? All right. Any other questions, guys, regarding these case studies, I guess? All right, let me minimize that. Okay, so again, you guys can kind of take a look at, I'll just make sure this is on the recording, right? In case you guys want to go back and just look at those answers that are there, okay? All right. Okay, so I guess what we'll do now is I'm gonna pull up the review sheet, and then I guess I'll probably pull up that chapter 8 lecture and go over some things that you guys want me to go over. Remember, the exam is also on chapters 5 and 6, and then also chapter 8. I mean, I think probably most of us probably agree that chapter 8 is probably a little more dense than the other 2 chapters. So I don't know what that means. It just means make sure you listen to the recorded lectures and you spent enough time with the material, right? So let's take a look at this review sheet. And so everyone today should have handed in or submitted that chapter 8 case study that we just went over, and also your completed review sheet, right? Okay. So again, just a reminder, right? Chapter 5 was focused on obesity, basically, okay? Chapter 6, substance use, and then chapter 8, fluid and electrolyte imbalances. Okay, so remember at the beginning of class last week on Wednesday, you guys basically were defining these terms. So those all should be defined on your review sheet that you submitted. And then if we take a look at some of these other things, I'll probably, like I said, I'm going to pull up, I guess, let me just kind of put this up there and just see if anyone has kind of questions right off the bat in terms of something specific you want to make sure that I focus on. Otherwise, I'm going to pull up the e-text and go over some of those questions. So I think some of the sort of check your progress questions are helpful. So I was going to kind of do it that way. And then I'll do some of the multiple choice questions again, if you guys want as well, like we did for some of the other earlier chapters. Let me just get a pen. So think about if there's anything specific you guys want me to go over in more detail. And I'll jot it down. That way, when I start going over the chapter 8, I can make sure I hit on them. Anything? You guys can just unmute and just let me know.
The RAS system.
Okay.
Nice.
Anything else that sort of jumps out at you guys? Did you want me to go over?
So like I just had a question.
Go ahead, Rachel. And then
so I just had a question. So regarding the different like hypo and hyper terms, right? So I realized that there's a lot of information on that. So how do you want us to like go about, I guess like I don't know, memorizing or do we just need to understand it? Because like it's a lot of information.
So I think the big thing, and I say this in the recorded lecture, is that when I go through each one of these, right, or when I first introduced, say, sodium imbalances, right, there was kind of one slide of information that described kind of why is sodium so important to the body, right? So I think you should know those things.
Okay.
You're not going to be able to memorize, what are the symptoms for hyponatremia, hypernatremia versus hypocalcemia, but I feel there was definitely certain things that I sort of pointed out for sort of each imbalance that were particularly important. Okay.
Okay.
If that helps. Okay. But yes, please don't, I put all those tables in there, not so that you guys memorize those tables, but I think it was important for us to sort of be aware of those symptoms. So I would say though, have those tables handy during the exam so that, again, you guys have notes, right? So you can have those tables handy and just kind of take a quick look at those tables, okay? But in terms of studying, don't memorize those symptoms and stuff like that. Just have them handy, okay? And then what you want to know is really, again, understanding why is sodium important to the body? Why is calcium so important, right? What in particular is it involved in? Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Could you go over isotonic fluid volume excess and deficit?
Yeah, so that's just like in general, right? An increase in in fluid volume. Yep. Not specifically, right, focusing on, too much sodium or too much calcium. It's just sort of in general this increase in fluid. So yeah, I'll go over that for sure. Anything else, guys?
Can you do ICF and ECF?
Okay, so I can probably quickly do that right now without pulling
Yeah.
it up, but I'll pull that up. I'll pull up the slide for it too and review. But just in general, quick, right, on your review sheet, what did you put for ICF there if you're going to define that?
Oh, well, it said for, it just said outside the cells, and then ICF was inside the cells, and then ICF is the largest portion.
Correct. Yeah, so intracellular fluid, right, is the fluid that's inside your cells. Extracellular, outside of your cells. And correct, most of the total body water is comprised of the fluid that's inside of your cells. Okay. And I'll pull up that slide though, just to make sure, just to kind of make sure I go over everything there. But that's really the gist of it. I mean, the other thing to think about though that goes along with ICF and ECF is what ions are particularly present intracellularly versus extracellularly. So if you think about sodium and potassium, right? If you think about intracellular, which one out of the two is more predominant inside the cell, potassium or sodium?
Is it sodium?
Sodium.
Inside the cell.
Potassium.
Yeah, look it up. Go look it up, guys, and somebody tell me confidently what the answer is.
Because you said it's the plus ions, right? Or
Sodium and potassium are both positive ions.
yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Which sodium or potassium, which one has a higher concentration inside the cell?
Sodium. Potassium.
Look it up, guys.
No, potassium, Professor. Potassium. Outside of the cell is sodium, so inside it is
Correct. Yeah. So outside of the cell in the extracellular fluid, you have a much higher concentration of sodium than potassium. Inside the cell, you have a much higher concentration of potassium. So anyway, that's kind of one other thing that's sort of different between the two. And this particularly, again, becomes important when we're talking about membrane potential, right? And charge across the membrane and cells generating action potentials like muscle cells and neurons, okay? If the concentrations are off, right? Or if you're talking about something that's particularly affecting the extracellular fluid versus the intracellular fluid, it's going to predominantly, affect one of those ions versus the other, right? So that's kind of what I wanted you guys to just think about, right? So what's present in the intracellular fluid versus the extracellular fluid is different, okay? So so again, changes in the fluid volume would, right, if you just thought about changes in fluid volume intracellularly versus extracellularly, though that change in general would affect, sodium and potassium differently depending on whether you're talking about outside the cell or inside the cell. Okay, so I guess One. Sorry,
I had a question. Are the concentrations differences due to the active transport system and how it comes out and then out of the cell?
The concentrations that exist, correct. They are a result of that sodium potassium pump. Yes. So the levels or the concentration of sodium that's maintained in the extracellular space versus intracellularly is again a result of that sodium potassium pump. If the sodium potassium pump wasn't there, the concentrations of sodium and potassium would be very different. Yeah.
Okay, because I was confused on to why. Obviously, like now we know potassium is like inside the cell, but why is it inside the cell?
Why? Again, because it's complicated, right? There's not really one why answer, but if you think about just like what happens during an action potential, well, and okay, two things. So if you just think about cells in general, they have a certain charge across the membrane that we call a membrane potential. If there was no sodium potassium pump that pumped these ions against their gradient, they would just sort of come to equilibrium based on the electrochemical gradient, based on the concentration of those ions and also the charge, right? Because they have a charge. And so what would happen is it would drastically change that membrane potential, okay? And then if you think about during an action potential, if that membrane potential was changed because these ions were not distributed properly, cells wouldn't necessarily be able to generate an action potential because of it. So it all coincides with membrane potential and the charge. And the membrane potential is not only important in action potential, but in other functions of the cell as well. So like I said, it's a complicated question, I guess. So I kind of gave you a couple of different reasons as to why. But it has to do with really with membrane potential, and which essentially is the charge across the membrane. Does that help? Like I said, it's like
yeah, it makes sense now. Thank you.
Other topics, guys?
Do we have to know the 3 components of the ECF?
Yeah. Yeah, all of that background information that I gave you guys in the beginning of the lecture, you guys should know. Yeah. Other questions? I'll hit on that too.
Do we need to like know specifically like the differences between the percentages of that body weight and the body, I guess, volume, I think it was?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, again, memorizing the actual percentages, no.
But just like having an idea
of what, yeah. So, right. So you're talking about here. So let's go here. Right. If you're talking about these percentages here, right? I think I think we should know that if we're just talking about an adult male, that you have in terms of like weight, right? Body weight, 60% of that adult male's body weight is going to be water, right? Total body water. Okay. I think we should know that. I mean, I think it's the idea that, you know, a lot of your body weight is made up of water, which is why when we just talked about that case study, right? Because she had edema, how much did that affect her body weight? A lot, right? And so understand that most of the body weight is water, or, you know, more than 50%. And then if you talk about newborns, it's slightly higher, okay? You know, when you get—
How about the female, professor?
Go ahead. What'd you say?
How about female? Because there we just saw about the male.
I mean, it's similar. I don't know exactly how different it is, but it's going to be similar. It's around the same percentage. They're just kind of giving you an idea of in a 70-kilogram adult male. I would venture to say that it may be slightly higher, and it probably fluctuates with like menstrual cycle and stuff like that. But it's around the same. It's going to be similar. Somebody can look that up if they want. Okay, so like in terms of memorizing these like 62 to 70%, no, you don't need to do that. Okay, I don't want you guys doing that. Okay, but again, we want to understand though. This is one thing we should know, and I think we already mentioned this, that most of, I think Maria mentioned that, right? Most of the fluid, right, in that total body water, or the fluid that's in your body, most of it is intracellular fluid, right? And then the rest is extracellular fluid. And then remember, we said we can divide extracellular fluid into these different components. okay? And so I think Marianne just asked about that, right? These 3 different components, we should know those, okay? Questions about that, guys? And then remember this figure then kind of, you know, again, puts into perspective with total body weight. So 60% of total body weight is your total fluid, and then it breaks down the percentages from there. Should you memorize these percentages and like study this figure for like a lengthy amount of time? No, there's many other important things that you should focus on, okay? Any other questions about this sort of topic here, guys? No? Okay. Okay, so I think that brings us to Manuela's question about this general increase, right? Of sort of an isotonic volume imbalance. So, well, one, what do we mean by isotonic, I guess?
The same solid and fluid.
Yeah, so it's the idea that it's the same sort of concentration of solute, right? Inside and outside of the cell, right? So, and in this case, when we're saying isotonic imbalance, it says equal alterations in sodium and water concentrations, right? So it's like you're increasing water and sodium or you're decreasing water, right? So it's this equal increase and decrease versus when we talked about like a sodium imbalance where we are just increasing sodium or decreasing sodium, but the fluid is not necessarily increasing and decreasing along with it. Does that make sense? Does that help a little bit?
So in an isotonic imbalance, it's both go up or down. And
Correct.
then in individual conditions, like that specific ion increases or decreases, but
Yes.
the water concentration remains the same.
Correct. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, water concentration is always going to
Well,
be.
it doesn't fluctuate as much as the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay. So, and I guess, and then, you know, in terms of, you know, this part, I think we kind of all went, like, we've already did this, right, in biology. So you guys probably understand this a lot, right? And we probably understand hypotonic and hypertonic and what we mean by that, right? And so this is more, again, of the idea that you're just, right, you're increasing both sodium and water, or you're decreasing both sodium and fluid, okay? So this is sort of more, right, sort of more general. And then we talk more specifically about those specific ions, okay? So if you're talking about, you know, just excess fluid levels, okay, these are some of the symptoms. And I think one other thing that and again, don't memorize these symptoms, guys. That is something easy that you can quickly check, okay? Like be smart. Memorizing these things is not smart. Spending time to understand the concepts that are really presented in the beginning of the chapter, smart, okay? Spending time to understand, you know, kind of like, you know, this part in terms of these regulatory processes, smart, right? I'm definitely going to put one of these figures on there, if not 2 of them, just so you guys know, okay? Do you have to memorize them? No, because I'm going to give you the figure, but I'm going to find out if you understand, okay? So like I said, again, do not spend time memorizing symptoms or signs. You can quickly just pull those tables up if you need them, okay? So I guess this brings us to this RAS, this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, okay? So again, this kind of first slide here about sodium imbalances, right? Is kind of talking about regulation, right? So how does the body regulate sodium levels, right? What's one of the ways that it does that, okay? And this is one of the symptoms here, okay? And so if we've heard of aldosterone before, right? Maybe not. Aldosterone, you consider it a mineralocorticoid. It is produced and released from the adrenal gland, right? From the adrenal cortex, okay? And it is part of this mechanism, okay? Now, this mechanism gets activated by a decrease in blood pressure. So if you say there's a decrease in blood pressure, how does that relate to fluid volume, I guess, in general of the body, right? A decrease in blood pressure might indicate what in terms of the amount of fluid?
Doesn't it? Oh,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
What was that? Can't see. I see Fabi, and who else was trying to answer that? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Fabi. Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Maria.
Oh, I was just gonna say that doesn't it result in sodium retention? That's why it's like yeah.
So again, think about decrease in blood pressure. What does that indicate about fluid levels, just in general, fluid levels?
Increase fluid volume.
If you have a decrease in blood pressure,
I don't know. That's what I would say. I would
so what,
say
remember I just gave you the analogy about the hose? If there's not a lot of water in the hose, does it have a lot of pressure? Yeah, right?
No.
Increased blood pressure, there is more volume, right? If
Yeah, yeah.
there's other reasons why blood pressure is affected, okay? But if we're thinking about its relationship to fluid volume in general, a decrease in blood pressure would sort of indicate that maybe there's a decrease in overall fluid levels in the body. Yeah?
Mhm.
Okay. So this system that we're talking about here, this RAS, and I'm going to flip to the picture in a second, is activated by a decrease in blood pressure, okay? And yes, once it's sort of activated, it leads to sodium retention and increased fluid volume, because these kind of go hand in hand, which then serves to increase blood pressure, okay? Now, again, there could be other reasons why blood pressure is affected, but again, we're all focusing on fluid and electrolyte maintenance essentially here, right? Okay, these peptides here that are listed here, these are actually released and synthesized by the cells of the heart. Okay, so atrial natriuretic peptide is released by the atrial cells, and then brain natriuretic peptide by the ventricular cells of the heart. Okay, and so these are served to sort of turn off the system, right? Because you don't want the blood pressure to increase too much. Okay, so these are involved as well. All right, so if we take a look at this, okay, so you got a couple decent amount of things going on here. And again, we said that this is sort of activated, right, in response to low blood pressure, okay? Now, this up here, this angiotensinogen, is something that's in the plasma. It's there. It's always there, okay, kind of ready. It's not going to do anything unless it comes in contact with renin, okay? Renin is what's released or produced in response to the low blood pressure, and it's released by the kidney, okay? That then causes basically the production of angiotensin 1, okay? Once that's produced, again, there is an enzyme that exists that's then going to convert it into angiotensin 2, okay? Angiotensin 2 will constrict the arteries, right? Which will increase blood pressure. It will also cause a release of aldosterone, okay? Aldosterone will cause an increase in sodium reabsorption, okay? And increase in sort of fluid retention, and then would lead to increased blood pressure as well. So angiotensin 2 sort of has two functions here, right? It's going to directly constrict those blood vessels to increase blood pressure, but it's also going to affect aldosterone here, okay? Questions about that? So again, it's complex, but we don't need to memorize, but we need to be able to understand. Questions about this RAS system here, guys?
So just to understand, angiotensin is always present in the blood, but it only starts to have these effects to increase blood pressure when it's combined with renin.
Yeah, angiotensinogen, that's the precursor, right? So then once it combines with renin, you'll get angiotensin 1 produced, right? Then again, then there's another enzyme that will convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And then angiotensin 2 is what has that biological effect.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions, guys? Okay. All right. I mean, that's in terms of what you guys asked, that's what we got here. So again, what I was saying is particularly, you know, pay attention to kind of the first slide when we're talking about each individual, sorry, that's not where I meant to go, each individual imbalance, right? So for sodium, you know, we talked about, I think we talked a little bit, or I talked a little bit more about sodium too at the beginning of the isotonic imbalance. So understanding that sodium is the ion that's predominantly present in the extracellular fluid, right? It is involved in maintaining membrane potential, but particularly important in generating action potentials, okay? In terms of regulation, this RAS system, okay, important to know. If we move on and we move on to potassium, oh, so yeah, this as well. This is kind of, here, let's look at this figure too. What do we got going on here? So this picture is sort of a more general kind of picture just to show you or to illustrate how those normal sodium concentrations are maintained, okay? And so we just talked about, or we will talk about, sorry, wait, if we go back here, right? We talked about aldosterone here. We will talk about ADH later on, okay? Wait, let me see where that is. Now, I wanna make sure we go over that too, guys. Did I talk about that first? Where the heck is that? When did I talk about
That's
that?
in figure
8.5.
8.5.
Oh, it's 8.5? Thanks. I knew. Yeah, okay, sorry. I was gonna say, I know I talked about that. So again, you guys we should be understanding this figure as well. Does anyone have questions about this? So that other overview figure that I just showed you is kind of taking this and kind of reiterating it, I guess, a little bit. Questions about this, guys, or we understand this? So again, another regulatory mechanism, okay? Because what we were talking about first was the sort of general regulation of fluid volume, right? That's why we then talked about, all right, what happens if you generally have too much fluid or too little, okay? And so this is the sort of regulatory mechanism that's going to affect fluid levels, okay, in general. Questions, guys? All right, so we should make sure we understand that as well. Again, if we go back to this figure here, you know,
Dr. Kaminsky?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. There isn't a figure 10, right?
A figure 8.10? Is it on the
Yeah,
review?
because no, well, it says electrolyte imbalances, no terms for each type, figures and tables, and then parentheses, no figure
Well, wait,
8.10.
there
I
might.
also didn't know what to put down for that.
No, I
I
probably.
figured you meant like there is not, or you misspelled no, or
No, I was saying that you didn't have to worry about figure 8.10. However,
okay.
I believe that this is figure 8.10. Let me double check.
Okay.
So
Then
the
where-
point,
is
it's
that in
actually
that folder?
redundant. This figure is actually, like I said, it's that figure 8.5 essentially kind of shows you this. Let me just double check that that's true. Yeah. Yeah. So again, I don't think that this is really any different than what figure 8.5 is showing you. So you can just go with, don't worry about this figure then, if that's what I have on the review sheet. I won't use that figure in the exam if I'm going to use it, you know what I mean, for one of the essay questions. But that is
Okay.
what I meant, not to worry about figure 8.10. Okay. And it is this one. So I probably should label it as that. But like I said, this is basically the same information that is here in figure 8.5. I think it's just kind of meant to show you, you know, all right, what happens again, essentially it's the same information. I mean, the idea is that it's also, yeah, that's why that figure is a little bit different, because this particularly is focusing on, is more general, right? Because it's just saying blood osmolality, whereas the other one is particularly saying, okay, well, what if sodium levels are increased or decreased? But again, it's the same mechanism. So don't worry about 8.10, because again, it is essentially the same information that's provided here. Okay, so do we understand this figure, guys? Everyone understands that figure? So if we say increase in blood osmolality, what does that mean?
It means
High blood volume.
yeah.
What does blood osmolality mean?
Solid and solute. Means the
Correct. You're right. So what does it mean if there's an increase in blood osmolality? Do you have more solute or less solute?
more solid.
More
Yeah,
solute.
more solute, right. It's saying that you have a higher percentage of solute in the blood than you should, right? And if you want to just think about sodium, fine, you have a higher percentage of sodium in the blood than you should, right? And if you think about the flip side, then that probably means that you have decreased levels of fluid, right? Or water. Does that make sense, guys? So again, when you think about osmolality, you want to think about the solute, right? Whether it's sodium, whether it's potassium or whatever, because in terms of osmolality, that's a more general term, okay? So there is an increase in the solute, and therefore there's a decrease in the amount of fluid, right? So if you're gonna try to fix the increased blood osmolality, what happens here? What's the ADH doing?
And change it to allow water to get in.
Say it again, Chrysantha.
It allows the presence of water so that it can compensate the solute and solvent.
Yeah, right. So right, you want to conserve the amount of water, right? You want the kidneys to reabsorb more water, right? By reabsorbing more water, you're then going to decrease that blood osmolality because there's more water now, and you didn't essentially change the solute concentration, right? If you look on the flip side here, you have a decrease in blood osmolality. What does that mean? There's less solute, more water. So what would you want to do in this case? What would your body want to do? Just look at the end result there, and let's talk about urine output. Is it going to increase urine output or decrease urine output?
Increase.
Yeah, increase, because now there's too much water, wants to get rid of that water.
May you repeat again, please?
So if you have a decrease in blood osmolality, that means what? There's less solute, there's more water, okay?
Yeah.
If we're only, so one of the ways the body can correct that is by causing more water to be released, right? So it says here, decreased reabsorption of water into the blood. If you think about the kidneys and the tubules there, the body's not going to take in more water. It's going to keep that in the tubules, and it's going to be excreted out as urine. Okay, so it increases urinary output. Okay, more water is going to be released. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so the way the body here is correcting the osmolality imbalance is by either decreasing the amount of water that's released or increasing the amount of water or the amount of urine that's output. Okay, that's essentially what it's doing. Okay, so it's altering the reabsorption of water to fix the osmolality difference. That makes sense. Okay. So again, that other figure 8.10 essentially is showing the same mechanism. Okay, so focus on 8.5 and 8.9. Other questions, guys? Other questions, because we're just about out of time. So is there something else you guys want me to go over?
It means in those disorders we have to know each and everything, maybe not like a specific in one.
So like I said, do not spend a lot of time, especially too with these diagnoses. I say that in the recorded video as well. You know, I'm not really going to ask you too many questions about how we're diagnosing it. It's the obvious answer that the levels of sodium, right? We have a decrease in sodium osmolality or an increase in sodium, osmolality. So those sort of obvious diagnosis or diagnostic criteria. So I'm not going to really focus too much on that. For the signs and symptoms, don't memorize, have these tables handy so that you can quickly refer to them, okay? So spend your time understanding those figures that we just went over, those regulatory processes, and also what the function of, say, that one ion is, right? So what particularly is calcium, more involved in? I mean, what was one thing about calcium before we end that you guys noticed in terms of even noticing some of the symptoms and stuff like that, or some things that calcium is more important for that I didn't talk about with sodium and potassium, I guess, as much. Oop.
And bone health in general. You didn't talk about that.
Yeah. Would you say bone health?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, so this kind of brings up a whole other, something else here. Calcium, right? Phosphate, they're in your bones. Okay. If levels of calcium and phosphate are off, it can affect bone health, right? Also essential for blood coagulation, muscle contraction. Okay. Super important in terms of the function of the heart muscle cells as well. Okay, so that's kind of the things that we need to sort of be paying attention to. Also for this, there's another regulatory process, right? Talked about parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. Okay, so this was kind of an extra figure that I sort of added in just for a basic kind of understanding of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. But we need to make sure that we understand this figure here, right? You guys have questions about that?
Can we try to pass through maybe?
So this is basically showing you the effects of parathyroid hormone, right? That's what this is essentially focusing on here, right? Here's your PTH, parathyroid hormone. So in terms of parathyroid hormone's function, what does it do in terms of calcium levels? So if you think about blood calcium levels, if parathyroid hormone is released, what will it do to blood calcium levels in general? Is it going to increase blood calcium levels or decrease? Increases. And what this is showing you is kind of the three ways that it does that. Okay. So if you look at its effects on bone, what are parathyroid hormones' effects on bone? What happens there?
It stimulates the breakdown of osteoclasts. So
Yeah.
So osteoclasts are bone cells that they break down the bone. So yeah, it'll activate those osteoclasts, right, to break down bone. And then as a result, right, that calcium
release it in blood.
Yeah, it gets released. So remember, the calcium is stored in the bone, right? And obviously bones need it for that sort of really tough, extracellular matrix, right? And you need that. But it's also a storage place, right? So when your body needs calcium, it would essentially activate that process that we just talked about, okay? And then again, these other two mechanisms here will also lead to an increase in blood calcium levels. Okay. All right, guys. Well, class is over. So, if you still have more questions, I'll stay on. So just let me know if you guys have more questions. I'll keep this open, but I'll stop the recording. And if you have questions about anything else, just let me know. Okay, guys, I'll stay on for a little while.
All right,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. C.
Sure. Bye, guys.
Thank you.